my name is Andrea, and I started working in Synthet 1 year ago in August, after finishing my master degree in communication technology and information security. And today I will be presenting the work on criteria for realistic and expedient scenarios for tabletop exercises on cyber attacks against industrial control systems in the petroleum industry. And I wrote this paper together with Guro Hotvedt, who I also did my master thesis together with. So this paper is based on our master thesis. We were supervised by Maria Bartnes and Lars Botsberg from Synthet, and also Roy Myhre from Soprasteria. So now I will take you through the background and motivation behind our work. As I don't think I said it, but we mainly focused on the petroleum industry in Norway with regards to interviews. Industrial automation and control systems, they are originally, originally designed to work in a closed environment with no connection to the outside world. However, with the ongoing digitalization, creating interconnection with the IT systems, this reduces the cost of operations, and it increases efficiency and opens new possibilities such as remote access to offshore platforms. But this also increases the attack surface against the industrial control systems. So this was an area that we found interesting. So previously, the focus of preparedness exercises in the petroleum industry has been on safety. But in a report from 2020, DNVGL, they state that the sector actually has to focus on, or they lack clear guidelines on how to exercise on the security part of, they lack clear and concise guidelines on how to best develop and conduct exercises and threats in the area compromising the IX systems. Some of our motivation for this was also the Triton Malware that was discovered at the Saudi Arabian petrochemical plant in 2017. This malware targeted the safety instrumented systems, and they don't know the attack vector, but they assume that it was a result of a phishing attack, which shows that even if the attack targets the or goes through the IT systems, it can actually reach the critical part of the operational systems. So this was kind of why we chose to go into this direction. And while working on our master thesis in May 2021, the colonial pipelines were attacked by DarkSide, which is a criminal hacker group. And they only targeted the IT systems, but because they targeted the IT systems and the billing was affected, the colonial pipeline had to shut down the operations. So it shows that even if you also target only the IT systems, you can actually stop the operation of the operational systems. So our main goal with our thesis was to concretize which criteria must be evaluated in order to categorize a scenario as expedient and realistic. And we focused on tabletop exercises. So we define define expedient scenarios as a scenario that give a valuable learning outcome for the participants. And a realistic scenario is a scenario that revolve around using scenarios that could happen and hence are important to prepare for. So we focused on tabletop exercises because compared to other types of exercises, these requires a little effort and they are also low in cost. And you don't need any additional equipment or anything. So it's kind of a low effort type of exercise. And we wanted to make it easier for companies to prepare for these types of exercises. So we thought that this can be like a good starting point instead of having a big scale and really expensive exercise. So as I mentioned, this paper is based on our master thesis. And we started the work by conducting a literature review where we looked at previous incidents and also looked at today's threat landscape for Norway. And we also studied how you can or how to develop and conduct tabletop exercises. And when we were done with this, we conducted our first iteration of interviews, and we used semi-structured interviews because we wanted to gain as much information as we could from, especially from the operator companies, but also other parts of the industry with insight. So we didn't want to limit them in having a really structured form. We wanted to have more like a conversation. And when we were done with the interviews, we used the thematic coding to structure and analyze our results. And then when we had created both the scenarios and list of criteria, we had another round of interviews where two of the operators that we talked to, they validated our results. So we had interviewees from 8 different actors, and where one was a supplier company, and we had 2 operator companies, which are quite large also, not only in Norway, but also one company that is quite large internationally. And then we had interviews with 2 external parties working with incident responses for industrial control systems, and also 2 resources from the petroleum industry. And we also had one interview with the authorities who are responsible for requirements and follow-ups for safety, work environment, and readiness in the petroleum sector. So some of our findings, we saw that when we started working, it was a lack of known incidents in the area of industrial control systems and actually attacks that goes through the IT systems to affect the OT systems. And during the interviews, we saw that especially the operator companies, they were like, yeah, we really don't believe that this will happen to us because it's really difficult. We have a lot of barriers between the IT systems and the OT systems. And we also saw that to make a realistic scenario, it can be really difficult because you have to know a lot of details about which technical systems they have and use. Because if you create a scenario and then you have a technical detail that is not applicable to that operator, the participants in the exercise will kind of say, yeah, but this is not relevant for us, and then move on. So then you don't really get to practice on what you intended to. And we also saw that it's not enough to only have the scenario, but you also need to have a playbook. And in this paper, we didn't include the playbook because we had a lot of pages for each scenario, so it didn't fit. But it's in our master thesis, so if you want to look at it, it's there. And there we included the purpose of the exercise and also recommended participants, because it's really important that you have only the relevant people to be included when you have an exercise, because otherwise if people are not able to contribute, they can feel like, yeah, they feel maybe bad or yeah, not involved in the exercise, and that might also lead them not to be as enthusiastic for the next one. So it's important that everyone who are actually in there can contribute with something. And then we also had a list of example questions that you can ask during the exercise to motivate participants. So this is the list of criteria, and many of them might seem quite obvious when you see them. But the one that we found like most surprising was that a scenario should be unambiguous, because during one of our interviews, the interviewee he told us about a situation where he was working offshore for a couple of days. He was working for a supplier company, and he was doing some maintenance at the platform. And then during one night, he was called up by the operating center, and he had to come up there. And the reason was that they didn't have any fresh water, so they needed him to fix it. And when he got the water back, they also mentioned that, yeah, by the way, in this part of the platform, we don't have any connection to the gas detectors. And it turned out that the gas detectors had been unavailable for 17 hours, which is quite a long time. And the reason why they didn't react to this was because there was a lot of sea fog in the area, which can actually make the connection or interfere with the connection to the gas detectors. So it turned out that it was not the fog, it was actually a technical issue that led this connection. But when we had the Triton malware in mind, and also saw that they didn't actually consider this to be something more serious, they just thought that it was the fog. We wanted to include a scenario that was ambitious, because we thought it was important to see that even though there are other elements that can confuse you, you should always think that it can actually be an attack or something. But when we presented this to the operators, they mentioned to us that if you involve too many confusing elements, this might actually you start a discussion that is not relevant for what you actually want to exercise for. So that was a good point, but for us it wasn't obvious in the beginning, so this was actually really surprising. We created 8 different example scenarios, and we used the list of criteria that I showed you on the last slide to create them. Or we used the list when we created the scenarios to try to fulfill all of our criteria. criteria. So first of all, we based the scenarios on descriptions of previous attacks, threats or incidents that we either found in the literature review or during the interviews. And we chose to exclude all the technical details from our scenarios because we wanted the scenarios to fit to all the operator companies. So if someone wants to use our scenarios, they actually have to modify them so that they fit to the companies. But I don't think they have to change them, they just have to add their details. As I also mentioned, we included the playbook, so there are a lot of more information that the operators can use to easily create an exercise without having to plan extensively. So here I have just included two of the scenarios. And the first one is based on the incident that was described during the interviews, the one that I mentioned in the previous slide, where the gas detectors were disconnected. And the other is inspired by the Triton Malware. So they're kind of similar, but yeah. So both the list of criteria and the scenarios were validated by the operator companies. And the operator companies also confirmed that the scenario fulfilled the list of criteria. So we had, I think it was 2 rounds of interviews with the operating companies so that we could actually do modifications and then validate them one more time to see that we didn't make any changes that made them unrealistic or didn't fulfill any of the other criteria. So we believe that the list of criteria and the scenario collection can be used as guidelines for the industry on how to best develop and take usage of the scenarios for tabletop exercises regarding cyber attacks against the industrial control systems. And despite the fact that we weren't able to actually do a test with one of the scenarios or multiple of them, we believe that they are valuable and relevant for the industry. And there was also another company that are really involved in training and exercise in another sector that wanted to use one of our scenarios. So we kind of saw that as a seal of approval that someone actually wants to use them and modify them to their own exercise. Also the validation process that we had, it shows that the scenario and criteria may contribute to preparedness exercises being conducted more efficiently, where a valuable learning outcome is provided. And this was also our goal for the thesis. So does anyone have any questions?